For the last 10 years, fighting games have been in somewhat of an awkward state. Releases from AAA studios were few and far between and with unpredictable quality. There's not really a specific cause for this, but my guess is that the oversaturation of output from Capcom and Bandai Namco from 2008 to 2012 was a massive contributor. We were getting back-to-back new Street Fighter games, new Tekken games, new versions of Street Fighter games, Mortal Kombat reboots, remastered console ports of classic fighting games, a new Smash Bros. Game, new Versus games, new updated versions of Versus games that came out just a year before, new crossover games filled with built-in microtransaction mechanics that were completely ignored by their competitive scene because they were pay-to-win and game-breaking. It was a crazy time to be a part of the FGC, but there was not a single person alive who had all the time and money to play all of these games. If you were a professional Street Fighter player, you had to buy the game 4 times to keep up with the meta, 5 times if you were a psycho. And if you were a casual fan, you had to read a fucking manual to figure out which version to buy so you could play as Dudley. These updated versions being released so close to the originals, and sometimes at full price, made people lose faith in Capcom for milking their games. After this point, it felt like we had entered a dark era for fighting games. Capcom released Street Fighter V and Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite in embarrassing condition. NetherRealm Studios was getting a great casual audience, but its competitive scene was virtually dead. The only 2 fighting games that really proved themselves to the casual and competitive fronts were Tekken 7 and Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. But honestly, who expected Smash to fail? They could have just re-released Smash 4 on Switch with a new funky mode added and it would have done great. The future for fighting games was dark. Until... Holy shit, this game is good. Capcom was slowly regaining the trust of their fans through updates to Street Fighter V and consistent, high-quality DLC releases. But I don't think anybody expected a comeback this big. Street Fighter was back and almost completely reworked. You have this thing called a drive gauge now, right? And this baby is like if they took Street Fighter 4's focus thing and made it actually possible for people to use. It caused drive gauge to block, to break through blocks, to counter, to parry, to overdrive your moves, to punish your friend for thinking he can outsmart you. You can get in a single foot poke and cancel it into a rush and ruin your opponent's whole day. It is such a genius mechanic, and it's only part of what makes Street Fighter 6 so good. The single player content is phenomenal here. Sure, the arcade mode isn't as good as Street Fighter 4's, but at least it has it, right? The World Tour mode is such a fun way to get newcomers into the game. Getting to explore these huge locations and kicking an old bitch in the back of her head to steal her bingo money is my favorite thing I've ever done in a fighting game. Also, somebody at Capcom had the most genius idea to introduce a different control option for newcomers. Part of why fighting games as a whole have had a declining popularity is because they seem intimidating and unfriendly for new players to approach. If you ask someone who has never touched a fighting game to complete the tutorial for KOF 13, they're going to curl up in a ball and cry after 5 minutes. So giving the players the option between 6-button classic controls and 4-button modern controls was the perfect way to get more people interested. I was able to get my friend who is allergic to any fighting game not titled Super Smash Bros. To put 70 hours into Street Fighter 6 just because of the streamlined and approachable way to play. For the first time in ages, this game is finally focusing on the future of this franchise. Ryu isn't even on the cover of this one. Instead, they put this twink with a shit-eating smile on the front. I hated this dude so much until I saw how much of a shitposter his voice actor is.
Hey there, everybody. This is Luke from Streets.
L plus ratio plus no meter plus you fell off plus young Luke better.
So obviously he became my secondary character. For the first time since Third Strike, the aesthetic makes you realize, oh yeah, this game is called Street Fighter, isn't it? The music doesn't let you forget it either, with every song having some elements of hip-hop in their composition. Drive Impacts also have this burst of graffiti with colors that fit each character's theme. This effect alone makes Drive Impacts so satisfying to hit. Characters have a grungier and more modern look to them as well. Old fighters have the mature look they've needed for years, and new characters fit perfectly into the massive roster. Ryu and Chun-Li finally look older and ready to train the new generation of characters. And Ken looks like he's been competing in the Soup Kitchen tournaments. Speaking of Third Strike, this is the first time since then that the story goes beyond the third entry. I know some people don't care about that too much, but I think it was the best decision for Capcom to show that they are moving forward with the games. The story moving forward allows new characters to come in and old characters to get cool reworkings. Just look at how fucking crazy Kin's options are. Every character here feels viable and well designed. There aren't really any bottom tiers because the game mechanics give opportunities for each character to make a comeback under the control of the right person. Even when the community thinks Zangief is the worst in the game and will lose every single match against the unstoppable zoning character that is JP, Snake Eyes does his thing and dominates. Street Fighter is back in full force, and it's not the only one. NetherRealm Studios was one of the few developers that kept Western audiences engaged during the dark ages of fighting games. Mortal Kombat X and 11 did remarkably well alongside Injustice 1 and 2. Even when their games lacked a strong competitive scene, its casual audience was dedicated enough to keep things alive, as seen by the ridiculously lengthy release window for DLC in these games. But MK11 disappointed across most fronts. It certainly wasn't a bad game, but it didn't live up to the expectations set by both its predecessor and its amazing marketing campaign. So when it was rumored that the newest entry in the series was to be a remake with a new take on the franchise, everybody was dying to see what was in store. And not that much changed, I guess. There were a few major story changes, like the role reversal of Raiden and Liu Kang, and Sub-Zero and Scorpion being brothers, but that's kind of it. Which is fine. You can't expect drastic story changes like turning Johnny Cage into a one-legged grappler with dwarfism, but a bit more variation was expected when everyone heard this was going to be a reboot. Characters largely play the same that they have for the last 10 years. You got buttons for each arm, buttons for each leg, a meter burn trigger, but with one major addition: cameos. Cameos make combat complicated, but in a good way. Nobody expected Mortal Kombat to get a Marvel vs. Capcom assist system, but it gave the depth this series has needed for a long time now. It takes a lot of practice and good execution to pull off some combos in MK1, and that isn't helped by a tutorial mode that just flat out gives you wrong info and no timing tips. But once you figure out how to pull off that 15-second combo with a cameo into your fatal blow...
Oh, that's that good shit!
Mortal Kombat games really suffer from feeling slow and clunky, so I think cameos are a great way to speed things up in a match. As far as designs go, returning to the simple 90s look was a great move. I don't know about you guys, but when I look at over half of the MK11 designs, I just can't figure out what the fuck is going on. They chose this Kingdom Hearts method of more buckles equals a cooler guy. Now look at MK1. You got a ninja, give him a bold color and some weird elemental ability, and that's all you need. Not all designs are created equally though. Li Mei might be the most visually uninteresting Mortal Kombat character I've ever seen, which is a shame because she has my favorite gameplay of any character. It's also a shame that the single player options here kinda blow. The story is
What in the actual fuck?
Good evening, Johnny Cage.
well, it's something. Listen, I'm not a fan of Mortal Kombat story in general, so take my opinion with a grain of salt. But I just don't give a shit about sitting through 30-minute cutscenes of characters with no depth making quips. I can put up with most of the story, but Johnny Cage is the worst offender here. Bro cannot just shut the fuck up for 2 seconds. He's always making some movie reference, bitching about story conflict, or making Avengers-ass jokes.
Toto, I have a feeling we're not Kansas anymore.
Do not trust a word he utters.
Sounds a lot like my first agents. Get away from her, you bitch. Excuse me? You know, the movie. Tiny girl, ginormous alien.
I know it's part of his character to be a shithead, but he's just so lame and trying way too hard to be cool in this game. Johnny Cage works so much better when you just have him in a vacuum in the online mode, because then I just know that I'm pissing off my opponents and not myself by listening to him talk all the time. That's not to say that the whole story lacks good moments though. The entire opening fight has a lot of charm and good choreography to it. It's just overall not that interesting to me. As for other single player content, there's really only Invasions mode, which I also don't really care that much for. This might be some people's thing, but I just find it so tedious. It's this board game mode where you fight through a bunch of computer opponents to level up your character and earn virtual currency and gear for that season. The seasonal model is already irritating for a $70 fighting game, but it's more irritating that these costumes and gear were already created, and NRS locked them behind some grinding in a mode that most people don't want to play. I paid for Mortal Kombat, not Sonic Shuffle. Compared to MK9 and MKX, the lack of quality single player modes is honestly kind of embarrassing. Now, I know I've been pretty negative in this segment, but I don't hate MK1. I just think it was clearly rushed, and Mortal Kombat games aren't my favorite anyway. This game did give me my favorite version of my favorite character, Reptile, and I did have a lot of fun playing online matches once they started working, but until they release some more interesting content for the game, I think I'm putting it down for now. And it looks like that's entirely possible with how much fun Peacemaker and Omni-Man have been to play. Overall, this game was so much better than what came before it, and NRS is going in the right direction. But let's be honest here, MK1 was really just to keep us busy, while we were actually waiting for... The gap between releases in the Tekken series grew with each new entry. If the wait from 6 to 7 felt like a generation had passed, then the wait from 7 to 8 felt like an eternity. But 9 years is a fitting wait for peak Tekken. Tekken 7 set a high bar for any fighting game to come after it. It had the best story mode in the series, amazing customization and single player content, and immaculate online with consistent DLC support. But Tekken 8 took this bar and chucked it to the fucking moon. Bandai Namco must have had the same idea as Capcom, because they also introduced two things that changed the game. Number one is the new Simple mode. Every longtime Tekken player undoubtedly groaned when finding out the new game would have an easy mode. But hear me out. Tekken has no doubt reached a point of complexity that is highly intimidating to new and sometimes even old returning players. If some old head decides to relive his childhood and pick his favorite alien swordsman, he's going to be greeted with 193 fucking moves and not the faintest idea of where to start. Now imagine this same dude wants to pick up Yoshimitsu, and all he has to do is hit the left bumper and he has a significantly easier time getting into the game. He can now easily access a basic launcher combo or a grab or a low hit without having to know more than the buttons on his controller. Simple mode is made for these kinds of people. Sure, this can seem annoying when playing online or against friends for the first time, but Simple mode is designed for entry-level players. The higher skill player is going to know to just watch the highlighted inputs and block mid or parry low to beat the opponent. And the mid-level player can use this mode in the bind when they forget what string was the most effective for juggling after a stage transition. At the end of the day, this easy mode is what is bringing in more people to experience an amazing series. Tekken is the only surviving 3D fighting game, so it logically also carries the burden of finding new ways to keep this subgenre alive. And I firmly believe Simple mode is the best way to bring in people without sacrificing the skill ceiling. The second new thing Bamco introduced is the heat system. The heat system gives players access to new attacks and movement options, alongside dealing chip damage on block for a short period of time. The player has the choice to use heat at the beginning of the match to gain a significant life lead over the opponent, to save it for the chance at a comeback combo, or to chip out the last bit of the opponent's health. Introducing heat while bringing back rage creates so many endless possibilities in a match. Both you and your opponent have so many options to pull the rug out from each other's feet that you need to remain confident and careful in how you move. I've talked a lot about each of these games' single player options, so how does Tekken 8 hold up? Honestly, it's far and away the best one. Street Fighter may have had its charming World Tour mode filled with user-created monsters, and Mortal Kombat had a board game with the Avengers on DVD, but Tekken has something much better, a hype-ass story. Tekken has gotten so overcomplicated that you need to watch hours-long lore videos to properly figure out how many sons Heihachi has and why Kuma is his favorite. Despite this, Tekken 7 was able to deliver a crazy good finale that left everyone stunned for what the future of this franchise would be. And 8 does not disappoint in the least. It is such a good story that I don't even want to spoil it for anyone watching this that hasn't played through it yet. This is the first time I've played through a fighting game story mode and wanted to sit through every single cutscene. Tell me this isn't the coolest, most ridiculous shit you've ever seen. It might have somewhat basic shonen kind of themes of self-discovery and lineage, but it fits so perfectly with the Tekken story, and it's exactly what a game like this would need. Jin's conflict with Kazuya and his devil genes create the most profound plot and character growth Tekken has ever seen. Throughout it all, we see the growing tension as Kazuya grows stronger and Jin loses confidence in his ability to stop his bastard father, while the rest of the cast does what they can to support him, until it all comes to a head in my favorite Tekken sequence of all time. Fighting games may have gone into a deep slumber, but this past year has shown that they are far from dead. I only talked about the 3 major releases within the last year, but there are so many other games that have come out and helped revive this genre. Guilty Gear Strive, Rivals of Aether, KOF 15, Dragon Ball FighterZ, and so many other smaller projects kept the devoted FGC busy. We have entered an era of almost equal quality and quantity fighting games as the late 90s. Without the few development studios pushing to keep the genre afloat, I don't think it would have been possible for these 3 giant franchises to make as big of a comeback as they did. Street Fighter 6 is selling twice as fast as 5 did, MK1 is getting much better reviews than 11, and Tekken 8 sold 2 million copies in its first month. All 3 of these major releases took time and effort to make sure that they were the highest quality additions to their series. It's clear that the new shift in the genre is geared towards accessibility and aggressive gameplay. Street Fighter and Tekken introduced simpler control schemes, and Mortal Kombat rebooted the whole storyline to welcome in newcomers. And to prove that these decisions weren't made at the expense of high-level gameplay, they introduced new mechanics that reward aggressive but calculated moves. Capcom proved that they listened to every criticism of Street Fighter V with how much care they poured into single-player content and character designs in 6. Bandai Namco showed that they wanted to redeem the war criminal that they created, and NetherRealm Studios made another okay game that I put down after a few weeks. It's unfortunate that all 3 have resorted to scummy microtransactions for cosmetics, but at least it isn't anything too important. The legacy of these 3 installments is only just getting started. With the upcoming releases of Akuma, Ermac, and Eddie, I really can't wait to see how these games keep evolving. I'm also really looking forward to that new Fatal Fury game. And who knows, maybe this Resurgence will bring back some other dormant series, like Clay Fighter.